Thanks everyone. I'm very happy to be seeing you face to face tonight after being sick in the latter part of last week and early this week and being in online meetings for about 7 hours today. So you can see my eyes sort of wandering a little bit. That's why. So next slide, please. About URPS, Urban and Regional Planning Solutions, that's what it stands for. We're the largest planning consultancy in Adelaide. We also have a small office in Melbourne. We get about 2,000 approvals per annum every year. We have three main sections at URPS that we talk about. Development, that is typically getting approvals, but also doing development assessment work for councils. We have policy planners, and we also specialise in community engagement. So those three main areas. Tonight I'm going to be focusing on development because that is the most relevant to you. What sets us apart at URPS? We build relationships, we don't break them down. We turn toward the community, not away from it. We see sustainability as a social responsibility that also makes good economic sense. And we have a culture of equity. Next slide, thanks. About me, I'm a planner with about 30 years experience. You might hear a little bit of my accent. I'm not originally from here. I'm originally from New South Wales. I studied my planning degree at New South Wales Uni and worked in Sydney for about 5-6 years before I became a real estate refugee to Adelaide 25 years ago, which seems sort of laughable now, but we haven't looked back. It's a great place to live. I have no family here, nor does my wife. We didn't need any convincing. We used to holiday here. So I don't get this whole, Adelaide has to prove itself. It proved itself to me 25 years ago. I mostly specialise in development facilitation. I have done a lot of work in the past in the policy area as well, writing planning guidelines. I also do a bit of community engagement from time to time. I have some experience working in local government. I started at North Sydney Council in the Ted Mack era, for those who are into politics and local planning, back in the very early 90s. I also spent a stint working at Burnside Council with Mark Kay years ago, who's the other town planner I recognise here tonight, but there may be more. And some of you hopefully will never have to be involved in an ERD court appeal. I do expert witness work in the ERD court. I've been involved in somewhere between 30 and 40 appeals. I'm a fellow of the Planning Institute, UDI Planning Committee member, and I'm also on the SA Heritage Council, which was about 4 hours of the 7 hours of online meetings today. Okay, next slide. Yes, thank you. Speed with my own notes. What I'm going to cover over the next half an hour, including question time, is council planner's role. I'm going to give you some definitions, abbreviations, and general instructions. I'm going to talk about verification. I'm going to talk about how you explain your variations from the planning guidelines, critical. I'm going to give you an example of that. We're going to talk about public notification, referrals to state agencies, council assessment panels, touch on ERD court appeals. I'm going to give you some closing tips. There's about 10 different areas, so you can pace yourself. I know people's concentration can meander. The council planner's role, I'm talking about them because that's who you're going to be dealing with mostly when you lodge development applications and you try and get the first planning consent. What their role is not, is to help you make money. It is not to get more ratepayers into the area. It is not to achieve the objectives of the elected members. And it isn't to side with neighbours. What it is sort of this simple. It's to approve development applications that sufficiently satisfy the planning and design code within the set statutory time frame. That's their role, nothing more, nothing less. They don't have personal vendettas. They're not instructed from on high to stop this development at all costs. They actually have a higher duty than that. And they know they are sort of discoverable, I suppose, or open to perhaps professional expose if it ends up in court. And there's very clever lawyers and barristers going through perhaps the decision of the council as recommended by a council planner, and nothing scares them more. Next slide, please. So let's get started with some tips or general abbreviations and some constructs for how the Planning and Design Code works. Planning and Design Code is the key and almost only document in South Australia used to do development assessment by council planners. The state government, through what's called the State Commission Assessment Panel, does do some assessment of development applications, but by and large, not the stuff you're going to be involved in, by and large. So the SA Planning Portal is the new electronic platform in South Australia. It's about 18 months old, something like that, 20 months old, where you lodge development applications and where the Planning and Design Code lives. It's a brave new world, a brave electronic world. I have to say, I'm a fan of it. You'll hear a lot of grizzling about it. It's not perfect. It's like the first generation of maybe Nokia phones. Great battery life, tough as nails. If you send a text, could do all that you wanted it to do at that time. Probably not, but wow, how good was an early Nokia? Suddenly you're making phone calls from wherever you wanted to. And it's been a real step jump, the Planning Portal and Planning and Design Code. And it does need some acknowledgement. Doesn't mean it's the easiest thing to use at all times. The Planning Portal is managed by the state government. The council still do the bulk of assessment work. So you find if you interact with it, you lodge a development application, you'll get documents spat out from Plan SA. You may think you're sort of interacting with the state government. It's actually the local council. 95%, 99% of the time that you're dealing with. So the order of things in the Planning and Design Code, that's where all the planning guidelines live. It's a bit of a change from the way development plans used to be, if you're familiar with how they work. Overlays reign supreme. Overlays carry some planning policy. They trump all else. Then you move to zone and subzone. Subzones used to be often called policy areas under development plans. Then you move to the general planning provisions. And that is the order in which the planning policy is read and interpreted. It's actually quite important. Some lingo that some of you may have come across. There's desired outcomes. They'll often be just simplified as DOs. There's performance outcomes, POs. There's deemed to satisfy / designated performance features, DTS / DPS. I'll talk a little bit about that as we go. But the thing that matters most is performance outcomes matter most. Satisfaction of performance outcomes is the goal. Don't let planners bluff you that DPFs, designated performance features, which is where the numbers live, like minimum lot sizes and setbacks and all of these things, they may speak to you because it's so easier for them to push you towards satisfying those as though they are the rules. They are not. They are guidelines and one way of achieving the performance outcome. The performance outcome is almost always written as a qualitative statement. I'll give you an example as we go on. Next slide, please. Now, I'll pivot slightly and talk about verification first. Who's familiar with verification? You don't answer those questions yet. Someone here, a couple of people. So verification is the first step when you lodge a development application. And it's the step where the council gets your documentation that's been lodged online electronically and decides, have you provided all necessary information for them to do a proper assessment of the development application or your DA. please provide the required information. And I put in bold with an exclamation mark, all of it. Not some of it, not, wonder if I could get away with not providing that. What you'll find is they have a statutory obligation to verify within 5 business days. Whenever you talk days in terms of planning assessment, it's business days. But if you don't provide the right plans, if they're not dimensioned correctly, they don't have the right scale on them, they don't have a north point on them, you haven't signed the electricity declaration form, you don't have a schedule of materials, the list goes on and on and on, they will bounce it back and say, we're not verifying. And the clock, the statutory clock doesn't even start. You're not even in the game. It's like you never launched anything. So you have to get this right. And I've got to say, this is fair and right. You're expecting council to do its work in a set statutory timeframe based on information they have said, here's what we need to do it, and you don't give them all of that information, and then you go, what are you doing? You've got to play by the rules, and you've got to get this information right. In the past, councils have been pretty gentle with applicants, and sometimes they provide some pretty bodgy information. The council hasn't held them to account. Remember, it's an electronic system, it's binary. It says, do this, and you move on to the next step. So if you're not providing that information, or if a particular council lets you get away with not providing some information, don't assume the next one will. All right? It's really important. You've got to have your house in order. There is a long, detailed list of what you need to provide in the Planning, Development and Infrastructure Regulations. It's a tough read. URPS has its own version, which is easier to read. Hit me up, and I'll walk you through it. I've talked about beware. No, there is actually no consequence. Oh, sorry, I haven't talked about this yet. There's a statutory timeframe for them to verify, 5 business days. But there's no consequence if they don't do it within 5 business days. It's a little chink in the system at this point. I think it'll get fixed before too long. And some councils actually know that, and they can take 20, 30. How long have you had for verification?
I went and complained, and they just said it'll go on an audit report.
Yeah, so they said, you can complain, who cares?
Yeah.
No one cares yet. Look out. It will go on an audit report. They'll be hunted down at some point in time. There'll be changes, so there are consequences for them not sticking to that statutory time frame. So you actually, I know it sounds like you did bring them and say, come on, you've got to verify, you've got to get this going.
Well, then I went to plan today, and that's the state on.
Yeah. So stay tuned, this part of the system will get fixed, I'm sure. And I listed some of the common errors there. I've already talked about those. Next slide, please. How can you make the assessment easier? Well, you can design development that is deemed to satisfy. We used capital letters at the start because deemed to satisfy is a thing. They are expressly listed types of development, and you have to satisfy all the relevant DTS quantitative guidelines. Think of it, if you operated under the old system, as complying development. Familiar with complying development at all? Some are. If you make a house that's set back 1 metre from the side, 6 metres from the front, it's a single story, and it's got enough private open space, it satisfies all the numbers, it's got 2 car parking spaces, bang, approval will be issued within 10 business days. But life's usually not that simple. Particularly if you're trying to do development and you're trying to do something interesting and maximise, you want to do more. So then it will likely default to the most common assessment pathway, which is called performance assessment. And it's, what's the old phrase for it, Mark? I've forgotten already. What performance assess used to be? Geez, in 18 months, we've forgotten the lingo. Anyway, merit assessment. So I thought I'd never forget that, but there you go. So, if you've fallen into then performance assess, most of the time you will, it means you won't satisfy one of the DTS quantitative guidelines. and they then become designated performance features. It's a really subtle and kind of stupid part of how it's structured, but they're actually sort of the same thing. And what you need to do with your development application is explain yourself. So let's say the front boundary setback should be in line with the houses either side. You want to come a metre closer to the front boundary than that. You need to explain in your application why that's okay. If you don't, you are relying on the council planner to make the argument for you. Why are they going to do that? Is it in their interest to do that? They're actually sort of obligated to, but I wouldn't trust them. I wouldn't trust them to make your own argument for your development. Link that example back to the relevant performance outcome. That performance outcome, I bet you will say something like, Mark, make sure the front setbacks are pretty consistent and the street looks good and you get a car parked in the front. And if you can actually talk to that qualitative objective and convince a planner it's okay, they'll worry less about the variation from the quantitative number. Okay? That's what you have to do. And that's what town planners spend most of their time doing, don't they? It's just sort of that simple. Next slide, please. So I found an example here. I hope this is pretty simple. And I've repeated that, the tip I gave before. Performance outcomes matter the most. Don't let planners bluff you with DPS. I've just picked one. This is to do with overlooking and visual privacy. So what's a performance outcome say? Development mitigates direct overlooking from upper level windows to habitable rooms and private open spaces of other dwellings. So you've got to read it really carefully. Saying of other dwellings, which is interesting, not other land or the public realm. So, you know, often what you think you've read and what is really written are two different things. That's the sort of thing that gets debated in court. So it's a qualitative statement you're trying to satisfy. How do you satisfy it in terms of ticking the box and moving on, no questions asked? You do these things. Upper level windows facing side or rear boundaries shared with another residential allotment on site. A, are permanently obscured to a height of 1.5 above finished floor level and are fixed or not capable of being opened more than 200 millimetres. So frosted glass to about this height on 1.9. And you can open it with a hopper window there above. Or B, have sill heights greater than or equal to 1.5 above finished floor level. Make sill height here. Or C, incorporate screening to a height of 1.5 above the finished floor level. So you can have an external screen, if you like. So do those things, bang, you've satisfied that, move on. If you don't, now, a scenario where you may think, geez, I'm not sure I really want to do that. Let's say you're on a 300 square metre allotment, you're quite close to the node, you might go, yeah, fair enough, I get it. Easy to do that. If the block was 1,500 square metres and you were, 15 metres away from the boundary before you get to the neighbour's dwelling, would you think you'd need to do that as much to achieve that? I don't know about you, I wear specs, I'm not even sure most of the time I can see that far. So there's a good example where you might go, geez, I don't know that we need a 1.5 metre sill height of frosted glass that high in this circumstance. Write it, tell them, don't let them work it out. They've got a lot to do and they might not be treating your application with the priority it needs and they'll probably just spit that back at you. So do that and then you can move on. And you're thinking, this is stupid, don't they care about me? Not that much. Move on. Next slide. Public notification I want to cover. Some of you might be a bit frightened of this. It's not an optional thing. It's not a measure of whether your development is good, bad or indifferent. It's a mandatory thing for certain types of development. The council planner doesn't go, oh, I reckon we might do public notification on this one because I think someone might not like it. It's a yes, no proposition for them. And it's spelled out in the code. So it must occur for certain types of development. It's not a judgment call by the council planner. It takes 30 business days, 6 weeks in total. So they've got to now organise things like they put a sign on the site. And you may go, oh, that's a bit weird and funky. I don't know, they've been doing it in New South Wales since the dawn of time, so we're just sort of catching up. But that takes time to arrange. And they've got to do letters to everyone within a 60-metre radius. So the actual notification period runs for 3 weeks of the 6 weeks. You can do the sign yourself, but don't. Did you hear me? Don't. Has anyone done the sign themselves? Have you? Did you put your hand up? How'd that go? Okay. The reason I say don't is you then bear the risk if you get it wrong. Right? If any content's wrong, if the sign's not put in the right place, if it falls over during the notification period and people can't see it, that's your problem. If you pay the council to do it, it's their problem. And the fees actually, I don't know, they're a few $100. You probably got to pay some other specialist to do it. You might save a couple of $100. You take on all the liability. I just wouldn't do it. Beware if you do. Save a few $100, but you'll up your risk. Response to representation. Representations are objections. Occasionally, and increasingly now because the notifications widen, they can be letters of support. I've seen more of them since new systems come into play, but most of the time they're objections. Planners like to give it a flash term called representations. Less emotional, apparently. When you're doing your response in writing to those, which go back to the planner, state your position in terms of performance against the code. Remember the previous example I gave you? So they might go, I have, seriously, I get this, I have young daughters, we've got a swimming pool, there'll be perverts in a building next door looking at them. Oh, mate, I get this more often than you would think. And you can spend a lot of time justifying why the people in the house aren't perverts. You can kind of be really going at the proposition put to you. If the planner cares about what the provision says, put it in terms of the performance outcome, not as to whether the neighbours will be perverts or not. Not relevant. Also, don't get suckered into spending time on things like, they'll say it will devalue my property. It's not a relevant planning issue. It's just, I wouldn't spend any time talking about it at all, in writing or at the CAT meeting we'll probably end up at. Don't talk about it. It's just, the planner knows there's nothing in that. The decision makers on the council assessment panel know they can't have regard to that. It's just not relevant. So don't embrace it. Just because people yell at you about something doesn't mean you're wrong. Okay. And here's a bonus for you under the new system. There are no third-party appeal rights. That means objectors can't take it to court if the council approves it. Now, under the old system, for some applications, the neighbours did have third-party appeal rights. So, you preserve appeal rights for everything other than restricted development. You're not going to be doing that really. I'm not going to talk about that tonight. But the neighbours don't. Okay, next slide, thanks. Referrals, I'm going to talk about this quickly. So sometimes your application will need to be referred to state government agencies, depending where you're building. For example, you might be up in parts of Mount Barker and you might be taking out native vegetation. Bang, there's a trigger to refer it to the Native Veg Council. And they get to comment on your DA. In most instances, they will have powers of direction. They can tell the council how the council must determine it. Because their policies typically live in the overlays. Remember, overlays win the day. So, some of the example referral agencies, does everyone know what the EPA means? Yeah. DIT, Transport, CFS, yeah, Fire, CPB, Coast Protection Board. You're near the coast somewhere. Heritage SA, NVC, Native Veg Council. It will add between 20 and 30 business days. It's not optional. It's like public notification. There'll be a trigger to do it. The council isn't judging you because there's that referral there. They're not thinking anything about it. They're going, you've just triggered that. It's got to go off to them. I've talked about powers of direction. Reach out to those agencies ahead of lodging your application to see if they are likely to be concerned about what you're doing. There might be some firewalls. You might have trouble getting hold of them. That's when you call people like me. And we have established relationships, and we'll tell you whether you really need to care or you maybe don't. It's pretty simple. Do your best to try and reach out to them. Okay, next slide, thanks. Council assessment panels. Who's been to a CAP? Yeah, half a dozen? How'd you enjoy it? No. Anyone have a good time? No. You don't like public performance, do you? Come on. I was involved in getting a Hungry Jack's in Westbourne Park approved last week. Barely got out of the meeting with my life, I think. And curiously enough, I'm diabetic. I'm never going to that Hungry Jack's, so I'm not adding to the traffic congestion. CAPs have 5 members. Always? Pretty much 5. 4 independent members, planners like me, lawyers, people involved in the property industry. They can be quite varied backgrounds. There is 1 elected member on each CAP. It is critical if your application is going before a CAP, and usually the trigger for that will be an objector or representative has requested to be heard, and that is the forum at which they are heard. Critical that the planner assessing your application is recommending approval. Now you can go up and they're recommending refusal. I wish you well. People go to CAPs, most weeks like me. I don't even like that situation, and occasionally I can kind of turn the CAP around, but geez, it's hard work. It's super hard work. In 5 minutes, I've got to convince them their professional that's had months to look at it is wrong. I've got 5 minutes to do that. So you've got to get the council planner on side recommending approval. There's a 5-minute limitation for neighbours to speak, and some CAPs will give them a fair bit of rope, some will be pretty tight on it. There's a 5-minute limitation on you, unless you've had 20 objectors, then they might give you 10 minutes. My suggestion to you is if they give you 5 minutes, try and do it in 4. If they give you 10, do it in 9. You want to be a breath of fresh air, they've got a long meeting. Keep your messages simple. Those meetings have got their own dynamic. It's not a negotiation or a conversation. So you get to get up and say your spiel, and they get to ask you questions, and then you sit down in the gallery and hope that someone doesn't punch you in the side of the head. And then you, that is an A, but usually. And then you have to listen to the debate while they debate your item. It's very apprehensive. It's an apprehensive time for any proponent. I implore you to listen carefully and respectfully. You can't re-enter the debate. And if they say, well, I reckon there could be perverts looking out there, which sadly I have heard from time to time. Going, well, you can't get in there. You can frown a bit. I certainly do that. But usually you'll find a discussion like that will come full circle. There's usually pretty rational heads on the panel, and they'll go, not sure that's relevant. So you've got to listen carefully. The other reason you're listening carefully is you're taking notes of who says what during the debate and how they vote. Born pessimistic I am, and I'm assuming that they're not always going to love me, and I may actually cop a refusal. And if there's a refusal, I need to know who's thinking what. I need a record of it. And the council staff won't be providing that record. Their minutes are very strict. Your minutes are going to be awesome. Minutes are power. So You may need them if you go to the next step, which is an appeal in the ERD court. Worst case scenario stuff. So next slide, please. ERD court appeals. It's an option if you think you're close to approval. Like it's been a split vote, the staff are recommending approval, and you lost 3-2. Ooh, you only need one vote. Right, I'll be going, let's lodge an appeal. Because as with most courts now, there's a compulsory conference process when you lodge an appeal. It's not a judge in a week's time and everyone's got to, take an oath and lawyers at 50 paces. Initially, there's a conference where you get to negotiate between parties. And how do you negotiate? You put back an amended design that addresses the concerns of the one vote you need. It goes up to the next CAT meeting most of the time. They might actually roll over and say, yeah, that's all right now. Bang, you got your approval for the couple of $100 it costs you to lodge an appeal. It's actually not that hard at conference stage. If you want to go to a hearing process, it gets expensive, time-consuming and uncertain. I'll have a great time. I love writing statements of evidence and giving evidence in court and, it's an exciting kind of thing if you're a planning nerd. You're 50-50 in court. That's a fact. And you'll think, no, I'm smarter than that, I'm better than that. I thought I was. I'm 50-50. It's really hard. It's a very difficult environment. And if you're in that environment, they spend days poring over all the problems with your application. I reckon George Clooney would come out of the ERD court looking ugly if they were examining whether he's good looking or not. They'd be going, oh, his nose, I've got nose expert in skewed, eyebrows too bushy. It's that sort of environment. So, use it for compulsory conference. Think carefully by the time you get there. And not many things go to full hearing, I have to say. Not a very litigious place, South Australia, thankfully. No criminals here, I don't think. No convicts. Next slide. I think this is my final slide. Just some more tips. If you speak with someone at a council, make note of their name and contact details, the date you communicated with them, and what you agreed upon. This is at any step in the process. If I had $1 for every time someone came to me and said, well, I spoke to someone at council, I said, this would be cool. That'd be fine. I would have retired, to do so years ago. It doesn't mean diddly if you haven't taken notes of that and you know who it is and you've held them to account. Make them accountable or don't bother. It's just gas, hot air. It's vibey stuff. No one cares. You're talking to someone at the council. So, oh, hello, who are you? Oh, yeah, great. Oh, yeah, what are we agreed on? How about I send you an email just to confirm that I've got that right? What's your email address? People will tighten up a little bit. But you actually want them to tighten up a little bit. You want some sort of conservative advice at the start, don't you? Is anyone here an umpire in any sport? Oh, yeah, okay. What's the umpiring mantra? Start hard, ease off. You put the whistle away in the final quarter because everyone's worked out what the rules are. The same applies to this sort of interaction. They'll start conservative. You need to be prepared to hear that and adjust accordingly. You can go bullish if you want, and you might have a good argument, but at least hear them, or don't bother asking. Get to know the planners at councils. If you're a repeat applicant, try your best to get to know them a bit. Be human. An example I put up there, which is somewhat provocative, seek feedback on your application after the fact. Make an appointment with the planner who looked at it and ask them what could be improved in terms of the information you provided and the design. Because, they probably won't love all of it, but they might say it's good enough for approval, but you might learn some tips about what they're looking for and what might make the assessment quicker and smoother. And you know what? You're just building a relationship. Remember, listen and be open. Get feedback on how you can make their life easier. It's basic human interaction. And be respectful. Don't just ring them up and expect them to be available. They have 50 other applications. Make it time. Make an appointment. Final thing, yes, you need to get approval to remove street trees. I'm sure someone will ask it, either in the development application or via the Local Government Act with a separate permit request. So, Jamie, I think I've used heaps of time. Sorry, I was going to try and load some questions. But yes, questions, and there's a mic here, so I can hear you and others can hear you.
Beautiful assistant running around.
Thank you. The government's just announced a review of the planning code.
Yeah.
Is this lip service, or are they really intentionally going to be reviewing it, and the extent to which there will be